Good evening. I'd like to welcome all of you to the January 19th, 2016 Vista Planning Commission meeting. Mr. Rossler, could you lead us in the pledge, please?
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Turley, can you call the roll, please?
Thank you. Commissioner Carroll.
Here.
Commissioner Kramer.
Here.
Commissioner Fleming.
Here.
Commissioner Garrettson. Here. Commissioner Jackal. Here. Commissioner Rosler. Commissioner Looney. Here. Student Commissioner Rudebush. And Student Commissioner Acevedo. Thank you. All present.
Thank you, Ms. Turley. Commissioners, in front of you are the minutes from the January 5th, 2016 meeting. If there are no changes, I'd like to see a motion, please. Commissioner Jackal, followed by Commissioner Carroll.
Thank you. I move approval of the minutes as submitted.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. This evening we'll do a hand vote for the approval of the minutes. So all those in favor of the minutes approval as they stand, please raise your hand. Please let the record show that the minutes are approved as submitted. Ms. Chow, are there any changes to this evening's agenda?
Good evening, Chairman Kramer. No changes tonight.
Right. If there's anyone here to speak on anything other than what's on this evening's agenda, and this evening is a workshop, a community workshop on parking, please fill out a speaker slip and bring it forward. Seeing I have none, Ms. Chow, are you ready for this evening's workshop?
I'm ready.
All right.
All right. Well, good evening, Chairman Kramer, Planning Commissioners, Patsy Chow, City Planner with the Community Development Department. Tonight, what we're going to be doing tonight is a Planning Commission workshop, a community meeting on the parking code update. We'll do a little different format from the Planning Commission meetings that we typically have had in the past. And what I mean by that is we'll still have formal presentation by staff, consultant. What I would like to do is engage the audience as an open floor discussion towards the end or the latter half of the meeting, after the consultant and myself have had a chance to go over some slides. And so if I may, we will follow that format. And we had a good dialogue discussion at the last meeting, so which I thought we would try to duplicate this time.
So we should hold our comments until both you and the consultant give their presentations, correct?
Sure. Or if you have questions and you feel like it's a good time to ask, feel free to do that too. I think we want to keep it informal if we can.
Okay.
I know that that's not common, but it's something that we just wanted to open a dialogue on the parking issues. So we'll see how that works out.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me okay? Maybe not. Can you hear me okay? All right. I know we're not that far, but is it okay? You guys can hear me all right? Okay. Well, maybe this is not. Yeah, it's a little fuzzy. Maybe I'll just hold on to this. Might be better. That way you guys aren't like, oh, God, it's static. So I wanted to welcome everybody to the meeting tonight. It's a community meeting, a workshop on the parking code update. And actually, you know what? Let's do this. This is 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, that's
all right, cool.
Much better.
This is much better, right? I was going to get like ear pain this evening anyways. So I'd like to again welcome you all to our second meeting on the parking code update. I thank you for being here tonight, taking time out of your schedules to be here to listen to the discussion on the parking code update. Again, I'm Patsy Chow. I'm the city planner. I'm the staff working on the parking code update. And with me here tonight, we have Stefan Turoff from Walker Parking Consultants. They've been hired by the city to help us with the parking code update effort. So we're very fortunate to have Stefan with us here tonight. Walker parking has been helping cities throughout California, up and down the state with parking code updates, regulations. So they're really the experts. And so again, we're fortunate to have them here. And I know I've recognized some of your faces, but I don't know if any of you or all of you came to the last meeting. By a show of hands, can you tell me if you were at the last meeting in November? Oh, great. We got some folks that were there at the last meeting. Thank you for being here tonight. So thanks for coming back for the second meeting. I appreciate that. Some of the things that you're going to hear tonight are perhaps reinforcement of what was mentioned at the last meeting. So, but just bear with us. We just want to bring everybody on the same page so that we can continue the discussion and be on the same playing level field. And I'm going to go over some information, some background information about the process itself and where we've been. So let's start by looking at some of the information here that I have up on the PowerPoint here. So a little bit of background information on the parking code update. The update started at last year, September, and we have allocated a total of 3 community meetings and workshops, which we started it back in November. The first meeting we had on the 18th in the community room, and today we're here, obviously, and we have one more meeting before the council, which will be a similar type of a workshop meeting before the city council on February the 2nd at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. The last time we did this was back in 1997, so approximately 20 years, so it's been a long time. And we realized that since that time, a lot of things have changed in our community. Development patterns throughout the city have changed. The opportunities for infill development have come and gone. So a lot of things throughout, whether commercial, industrial, or residential development for that matter. And also redevelopment projects, which unfortunately we don't have redevelopment funds available, or redevelopment itself has been taken, unfortunately, away from the cities in California. But nonetheless, a lot of that's happened over the years, and none of it, we discount, obviously, because it's all part of the growth and where we've been. As far as the main objectives of the parking code update is, and the question is really, why are we doing this study right now? And why is this important? Well, it is very important for the city as we look at parking as part of development and how it helps us move forward when we think about economic development. So essentially on the first bullet, it's the opportunity so that we can remain competitive in our community when we compare to other jurisdictions in San Diego County, and whether we are attracting the right land uses or desirable land uses into our community. With that in mind, we look at our general plan, the blueprint for the city. What do we say in there about economic development? And what are we doing in terms of parking considerations related to economic development and trying to revitalize areas throughout the city that perhaps are underutilized, areas that could be improved so that we can expand our economic base in the city and continue to promote smart growth throughout the city of Vista. All of this process, and with all that in mind, we're currently engaging in this update process that based on real data, or actual data and real data based on Urban Lands Institute, agencies or that are familiar with parking ratios, and how do they play a role in what we do right now based on data, an actual collection of data for Vista too. So it's real data, actual data, and Stefan will be talking more about that in his presentation. Now, no community meeting is complete without a quiz. So, for those of you that were here last time, and I remember who raised your hands. Now, I'm not going to pick on you, but for everybody in the audience, really, I just thought of 3 questions, and whoever thinks they have, the answer or pretty safe or pretty comfortable doing it, please raise your hand. And whoever's the first one, if you get it right, I have a little prize over here. So, all right. Parking is a free commodity, true or false?
False.
Oh, sorry, I got to look back here, too. I'm sorry. This is not fair, huh? The commissioners are entitled to do this. Who raised their hand first? Because I had my back to the commission. I'm sorry.
He raised his
Mike?
hand.
Okay, go ahead. Correct. And the winner takes home a granola bar. Oh, your dinner? Why did I think of that? That was awesome. Thank you. All right, next question.
You should have thrown it.
I know, I should have thrown. I'm not that adventurous, I guess. Construction cost per parking space, surface lot, can be anywhere between $3,000 and $4,500. True or false? Raise your hand. True. Nice, Terry. All right. Here's one. I'm not going to throw it at you. All right, the last question. Here's your chance. A minimum parking requirement is a local government mandated number of parking spaces that a property must provide for a given land use. True or false? Raise your hand. Go ahead. True. And the answer is correct. Here you go. Commissioner Rosler. Here you go. I have 3 bars left if anybody's hungry and wants it, because I just brought a box. I'm sorry. It's limited supply, I guess. All right. So the next slide is what I wanted to do is just to recap the results from our last community meeting, because for those of you that were there, we talked a lot of stuff about parking. A lot of things got repeated, but I thought I would just bring up some of the main ones that actually were repeated over time. We should require garages for parking, not storage. Remember that? A lot of parking spaces downtown, but not enough lighting. It's unsafe. We don't want to park there, so we need more lighting. There's concern with multifamily apartment projects. Not enough parking. Again, couples have 2 cars, not 1. That was kind of a repeated comment in the last meeting. There's concern about too many parking spaces being required of developers, and therefore we got to be able to create more walkable neighborhoods and rely on on-street parking, which people believe to be more convenient anyways, and perhaps maybe we should charge for it. Okay. Adopt realistic parking ratios. Families have more than 2.5 cars per family or unit. Adopt reality. So what is happening out there? Need more enforcement. Again, with the issues of people parking on the street, not parking their garage, using the garage as storage, etc. Street parking. Restricted to 30 minutes parking spot for the businesses, perhaps. People are taking up space. They're parking longer than it's allowed. They are taking space next to a business where they're not in that business. So what do we do in those cases? And one person said, and quote, "I hope we don't reject the building of good things because of parking issues." So there's like across the board different things that came up, and some of the things, again, that I put on this slide were things that kept repeating itself in the last meeting in November. We also did last time, which is this slide, which is briefly what's on your mind regarding parking. And for those of you that were there last time, we kind of spent like 2 to 3 minutes kind of going around the room and letting people speak, their mind as far as what they saw as concerns regarding parking. So what I like to do is spend like 3 minutes or what have you, but something fast, just to throw ideas before Stefan takes over, because I wanted to get us thinking of what do you have in your mind in terms of parking concerns, so that at least as we kind of go through the night and hear stuff from Stefan, we kind of have this idea in our heads and where we're going with it, and so we can come back to the concerns hopefully at the end of the meeting. So I'm going to actually, we can start right now, and whomever has stuff, Michael has I'm going to hand the microphone here, and I'm just going to use this one instead, and then we can just kind of go around the room, just raise your hand, and then we're going to come to you with the microphone. Am I on? Oh, great. Thank you. So anybody, if you raise your hand if you have any concerns. Terry, go ahead. You got one right here.
Mandated by state or county or whatever to how many spots that can be in a housing area or a apartment complex, because every time it comes up to these guys, well, that's how many they can have.
Yes, definitely.
Require 4?
That's why we're here tonight.
Can we change that?
Yes, that's what we're looking at right now is our parking code update at the local level. So all the ratios, parking ratios that we have in our code right now, that's the whole idea of the update, is to modify them or not, depending on whether there's a need for it or not. So, good question. Anybody else in the audience? Just thoughts, concerns that you have, things that you wanted to ask and you want to ask in a workshop? This is your chance. Commissioners, feel free to as well.
A concern that I've had, and I've raised it in several of our meetings, is to do with multi-family apartment complexes or condo complexes, but multi-family uses where we have ADA handicap parking, and I would like that calculation separate because not all apartment complexes have ADA people who need the handicap parking, and then it makes it for you don't have enough if you're, yes, if it's inclusive.
True. That's a good comment. Yes, we heard that many times before in past meetings. So that's definitely the opportunity to do that here. Go ahead, Commissioner Jackal.
Thanks. Kind of piggybacking on that, we've had a number of apartment proposals come before us that are, and I don't want to say this in a pejorative way, but are claiming to be mixed use, but they're not really, they're apartments. And I think we should not allow them to use the mixed use parking ratio when it's not really mixed use.
Good point. Good point.
That's one thing I was going to say too. I think it's very important that if they're going to build a multifamily unit on a mixed-use property, it should be multifamily parking guidelines in there. The other thing is, just quickly, I want to see that we have an adequate turnover of spots in the business area so that the customers have got places to park that they can get close to the business. I know that when I was down there, it was very common to have people that worked across the street from you park in front of your shop and be there all day, so I'd like to see something like that.
That's great. Yep. Good comment. Thank you.
Patsy, two concerns on the big commercial lots. One is the amount. Excuse me. We saw in Lowe's that we allowed the BevMo to go in there, and the parking seems to work just fine with those two uses, and Lowe's didn't suffer from the turnover or loss of spaces. The other one is Target, and it's the design and layout. I think I understand from my experience why the major uses want a big parking field in front of their store, but when you have to go in and have a circuitous route to find a space, I think we can do a better job of designing on that. And then the other comments on the multifamily that the commissioners have made, I agree with.
Okay, thank you. All right. Let's see, any other comments? How about the audience? Nope. There's a gentleman right there, right behind. Thanks, Michael.
Good evening. I was here last week, and City Council was approached with a project on, I think it's 2100 San Marcos Boulevard.
Oh, Vista Palomar.
That was going to be hotels and condos. Now, if you put a hotel on a piece of property along with condos, is that considered mixed use, or is that multifamily? So that is considered mixed use.
That is mixed use, yeah. Correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, any other comments? Oh, Terry, go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I was just made aware that if it's affordable housing, you have to go by state law.
The state does have parking requirements, and if they are, let's say, applying for density bonus and they would like to use the parking ratios at the state level, then we are obliged to follow whatever the state says. We don't have the ability to say no. That is a huge, yes, it is a huge impact locally because it's almost like we don't have control over that. That's true. Any other comments? You guys are too quiet back there.
Question,
No
Ms.
comments?
Question,
Okay.
Ms. Chow.
Yes.
For the state-mandated lower-income housing, are the parking requirements then significantly lower than what our current parking standards are?
If we compare it to the multifamily and the citywide parking, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, because our citywide, our multifamily parking is pretty high, and Stefan's going to go over the numbers and benchmarking with other cities even.
Okay.
Yeah. Commissioner Garrettson.
What kind of enforcement is there? I mean, what would prevent somebody from building apartment or whatever, and the requirements say 30 spaces, and you know they know they're going to have 60, so the other 30 are going to have to go to the neighbors. What kind of enforcement do we have?
If I understand correctly, in your scenario, the number of parking spaces required are 30? You started at 30, and they want to provide more?
No, there are really 60 cars that are going to go there.
Oh, okay. So where are they going to park?
So where are they going to park? But where's the enforcement? It's my understanding now there is no enforcement.
That's the crux of the dilemma, is where do they go, and if they are parking on the street. That's creating a lot of the concerns that last time at the last meeting, and both yourself and Commissioner Fleming were there, where a lot of the folks said, you know, they're just parking on the street. And we've heard that many times, right, throughout all the other projects that are currently going through the pipeline. So, yeah, it's an enforcement issue, and that's something that we either tackle it or we don't, or we have a way to do it. But again, that's why we're having the discussion.
One of my friends recently said that they have 3 cars.
Yeah.
They have one spot that is dedicated to them, so the first 2 people that come go to the public parking,
Oh.
and then the last one goes to the assigned parking.
Sure.
So, you know, where's the enforcement?
Yep. Good point. Commissioner Looney.
Patsy, on the multi-use, I know in building departments, there's a separate building code for, let's say, commercial or restaurant use, and then there's a separate building code for residential use. And it might be worth our while to look at the policy to see if we could partition the parking requirements into each specific use as well as does the building code. It's just as a way to maybe soften the effect of so many cars on a particular lot.
So in terms of the different land uses that we have, and maybe further specific than that, than currently what we have, general categories?
Right.
Okay.
Because as we've seen, they come in with a mixed use project, but there's only one. They're going to take the lesser amount of parking spaces to meet code,
Right.
when it really doesn't meet the demand.
Yeah.
And if we could somehow maybe partition even that building or the parking code to accommodate the specific proposed use of the
Get it.
building.
Sure. That would be probably more realistic, perhaps, in line with Commissioner Fleming.
Yeah, I had a question about the minimum number required by code. These are minimum numbers. Can we require, when it comes before us, could we put a stipulation that they have to have more than what the code requires?
We could, and
Or
that's...
are we restricted to that number?
We could, and minimum is exactly what Stefan's going to go over. Is a minimum, and they could do more. Now, us asking, or the city asking for more and saying, typically minimum requirement is what you're going to find throughout cities in California. That's just purely going with the code. But I'm going to let Stefan address the minimum parking requirements and how that plays a role in that or not. So I think we've, let's see, anybody else had comments? One more comment, and then we're going to move on, and I'll let Stefan take over. Go ahead, sure. No problem.
Apartment complexes, and you're saying that there's going to be a minimum requirement. Is that only for new builds?
Minimum.
The one that brought up those things about the thing last time.
Yes, I remember. Thank you for coming back. The minimum requirements, they're currently found in our code, so we're continue unless there's a change in how we do or strategize it in our code, in our parking code.
But the existing buildings, will they be affected? I mean,
No, the existing buildings, as if they're built, and I think the one that you manage, the complex that you're in, we're not going to go after, the existing projects and say, now you need to comply. That would not be fair.
wouldn't it be fair? I have a street up there that's so full of cars that it's a wonder people don't get killed.
Yeah, there's things.
No parking zones.
Yeah, there are things that we talked at the last meeting. We were talking about how it's triggered by some action or development action, right? So that it comes before the city. We have to look at standards, and so that's what would trigger it. But we wouldn't do a broad brush throughout the city and say, okay, now suddenly all multifamily projects in the city, you all need to comply with the new parking code. We wouldn't do that.
I understand that because a lot of places don't have the land. We
Exactly.
have the land.
Correct.
And the two on the other side of me, and that would relieve, oh my God. Because most of my people have 2 cars.
Mm-hmm.
And so they park one. I have 13 parking places and 22
Yes,
units.
I remember. You have very limited
So
parking.
It's like, that's why I was wondering if it's going to apply to the older buildings.
Yeah, no, not if there is no discretionary or what we call it, basically a request for a permit of some sort that would trigger the need for us to look at parking. Yeah. Okay. Sure, no problem.
Patsy?
All right, yes. And we need to move on, otherwise we're going to... Go ahead.
One last thought.
Yes.
The multifamily units that are going to go within the service radius of the transit station, it's going to be difficult given the comments that are here, but I'd like to see them given some type of a break if they provide for ridership on the transit.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out, but if they can provide transit passes, then give them a break on their parking spaces.
Okay. As an incentive or as a way to help reduce if they wanted it to or needed it. Okay. All right, so now I'd like to do is turn it over to Stefan, and let me see, what do we have on the next slide? So, Stefan, you're up. And basically, Stefan's going to take over from here. We're going to come back at the end again for discussion on this, but...
Sure, I think that's fine. Thank you. Let's see. I do have... Is yours working? I think so. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, maybe I'll turn this off. Thank you. Okay. You can all hear me? Okay. All right, members of the commission, thank you very much for having us and in allowing us to engage on this study with you. As Patsy mentioned, and I do see a few people from last time, but our firm, my name is Stefan Turoff. I'm here from Walker Parking Consultants. For many years, we were primarily an engineering and design firm for parking structures. And just to give you some context, because I think this is helpful, but as we designed and built more parking, the question always came up, whether local government, universities, shopping centers, how much parking is enough? And within that context, more and more of what we did became how many spaces is enough? And we began working more and more with code requirements. A lot of great questions. This is a big issue, but minimum parking requirements, which are a floor. I want to remind you that when you have a minimum parking requirement, it never precludes whoever's building from building more. And we work with big national retailers, restaurants, multifamily, and if the market is there, if they say it will help us, we think that we need more spaces, there's always that option. Now, I think generally about 75% of developers and builders build to the minimum requirement, which in some ways suggests that at least they think that's enough. But this is a complicated issue. Parking is like whack-a-mole. There was a lot of talk about on-street parking. On-street and off-street go together. But we'll talk about some of this. Briefly, we'll talk about how we are performing this study today. What are minimum parking requirements as commissioners? I'm sure you've had that come in front of you a number of times. the goals of minimum parking requirements, the benefits, the impacts, the unintended consequences. Is this very loud, by the way? Is this too loud?
No.
Okay.
Good.
We have come up with some preliminary recommendations, which we just want to set out there, and then talk to you all, stakeholders, and talk a little bit more about our status and timeline. So just about every city in America has minimum parking requirements for virtually every use. You know, how many spaces do you have to build for an apartment, for a restaurant, for a shopping center, for a bowling alley, for a mortuary, for a, tennis courts, and it's, across the board, it's out there. And they tend not to be very heavily researched. And typically, especially when a city's starting out, perhaps like Vista, 50, 55 years ago, you look at the city next door to you, and that's how those have been set. More and more, especially in California, as land gets more scarce, more expensive, streets get more crowded, people are trying to identify more precisely what a parking requirement should be. So our methodology, we have a lot of databases based on all the studies we've done for different land uses at peak hours. But everybody, every city is different. We work all around the state, all around the country, as Patsy mentioned. So we wanted to collect some data here, but also our base ratios for suburban land uses. typically we say parking requirements per 1,000 square feet. Now, here's something interesting. Okay, we say usually a parking space you provide is 300 square feet. So usually it's about, say, 18 feet long by 9 feet wide, and then you have to have a certain number of square footage to get into that parking space. So altogether, 300 square feet is actually a little low. But 300 square feet, any requirement that you have that's more than 3 1/3 or 3 1/2 per 1,000, you're requiring that there be more parking than building. And we'll show that a little bit, but you have plenty of cases, most cases, where actually the parking lots are far bigger than anything you have in the city. And that's part of meeting the parking requirement. But that's why a lot of cities have, even much or most of their land is devoted to parking. That's how it works. And it drives a lot of things. It can trigger traffic. It spreads out. When you talk about walkability, which came up in our last meeting, just the footprint of the city. I remember going hiking to Newport Beach on being on a hill. On one side was the older side of the city developed before parking requirements, down towards Balboa, the harbor. The other side was Fashion Island, all that. Looked completely different. One side much more spread out. One side was built with parking requirements. One side wasn't. That's an extreme example, but it has a huge impact. So most parking requirements are per 1,000 square feet. Some are per seat, for example, like theaters, churches, things like that. But if we look, for example, we have a community shopping center, basically something that's not a mega center. And we see pretty consistently across the board that the requirements. Vista, Carlsbad, Oceanside, 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. San Marcos, 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Doesn't sound like a lot less, but if you're saying 1,000 spaces in Vista, Carlsbad, and Oceanside, you have to provide 1,000 spaces. In San Marcos, you have to provide, say, 800. The math right there. But and once you talk about big development, you're talking about a lot of square footage, a lot of construction costs, and a lot of land in your city. What else do we have up there? Restaurants typically, our model and our findings typically show that parking requirements tend to be higher than actual demand. Restaurant is often the opposite. Now here we see restaurant. You can see that you require about 12.5 per 1,000, 12.5 spaces. Far more than about any other land use. It depends on the size of the restaurant, the type of restaurant, but Carlsbad is a little lower, 10 per 1,000. Oceanside, they base it just on the seating area, not the kitchen. So we had to do a little calculation to do apples to apples. San Marcos, Oceanside, even Vista, you're about the same, 12.5 to 13.5. Carlsbad is less. Carlsbad and San Marcos have a lot of restaurants. I won't go through here entirely, but you see office, medical office, banks, multifamily. And this is your general multifamily. Now, I will say this: that we've heard a lot of complaints about spillover here, but your requirement for typical multifamily that's not a special district is high, relatively high to what we've seen, relatively high to what typically we would recommend based on our data collection in other places, and relatively high to what we saw out there. The question is, what is being built for this requirement, and what is being built in other districts? So then we even have churches. We went to the House of Portrait and looked at that. Now, Patsy may want to elaborate on this a little bit, but again, your multifamily zone, your requirement is higher than just about anything we've seen. You have studio or 1 bedroom, nearly 2.5 spaces. There are 2.5 cars. Now, keep in mind, this is all an average when you require this. So some households will have less, some households will have more. A studio that has almost 2.5 spaces. I remember before I got married, I had 1 car. My old grandfather gave me the second car. I had 2 spaces for a 1-bedroom unit, and I kept them both. Had I not, I probably would not have. When you have the spaces, they tend to get used. When you don't have the spaces, they may get used also, and there'll be spillover. But typically, this is an average. 3-bedroom, 3 cars per 3-bedroom. Now, some people may have 3 cars, some people may have less, some people may have more. But the idea is that this averages out. Now, your mixed-use district and your downtown specific plan have less than your multifamily zone. But keep in mind, we also say there's a little bit of self parking, multifamily prices may reflect in part how many spaces there are. I mean, that's additional square footage, it's additional land, it's additional construction costs. There's some self-selection in terms of what goes on, partly based on price, but partly based on somebody who has a lot of vehicles saying, I want more parking.
Stefan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but these numbers you're showing us now, you're saying this is existing condition based on your survey?
No, pardon me. This is the existing requirement.
Those are the existing, based on our current code. And the only reason, sorry, Stefan, I'm just going to interject here for a second. The reason why I wanted to put that up is because as a result of the last community meeting, there are a lot of questions about, well, what about the Avalon project? What about the Breeze Hill apartments? How come that project got that? And how come this project? And I realized that because of the different zones, because, for instance, the Breeze Hill or the Avalon is a mixed-use zone, it required less parking overall. Although meeting the parking ratio requirements, less than the 2.33 that you see up above on the multifamily zone, because it's in a different zone. So I just wanted, for the benefit of the folks that were at the last meeting, just wanted to clarify that, because I kept getting the same question over and over throughout the meetings about that. And it's important to identify and make sure that everybody understand that there are different zones, different ratios, the way we have it right now. So,
This is the average of all those different zones for the city as a whole.
Not an average. These are the parking ratios for the particular type. Like studio is required at 1.25 per studio unit, 1.5 for one bedroom, the mixed use. So it's, we're not averaging anything. These are strictly from the code.
Gotcha.
I would say, yeah, these are requirements. And how we talk about parking can be confusing. When you say, how much parking do we need? Well, there's per code, there's per actual demand, which is typically what we work in, and then there are all other ways that you can figure out how much you need. What this is the requirements right now in the city. And what we're looking at is how much demand there is, what is appropriate to require. Because the requirement is, I mean, it is going to vary based on the type of building. It is going to
I think that was the last. So at this point, thank you, Stefan. At this point, we really wanted to kind of open it up. I just wanted to kind of, now that you've heard and from Stefan on some of the basic things and some of the things that maybe majority of folks, probably, quite honestly, myself included, and some of the things not knowing or being aware of the costs associated with a lot of this, to me was pretty eye-opening in terms of how that can affect in either a positive or a negative way, I guess, the overall development. So why don't we just go ahead and start questions, and we'll go back and forth and then try to answer them as they come up. Commissioner Carroll.
Hi. Okay, Patsy. I have some thoughts and comments, and it's a good presentation. No, not directly for you, but one of the things you said that caught my attention was that one of the primary interests of this study is geared towards economic competitiveness, and I think that's true from the city's standpoint. But I would guess that from the general public standpoint, this is a quality of life issue, not how economically prosperous the city is going to be based on parking. So, and that's what we're getting from the public, is that all of these parking issues are affecting their quality of life. And I understand that the economic competitiveness comes into play when you're talking about a commercial center or a restaurant or a bank and those types of things, but I think you got to lean towards what's the best for the community and the quality of life when you're talking about multifamily and residential uses. And in my opinion, the mixed use parking standards, and I'll call it an allowance, is flawed, and it's allows drastically more less parking than a multifamily standard. And I guess that's because of the theory that in the mixed use you're going to have commercial and residential, and there's going to be overlap, and while the people are at work, people are going to be using the commercial, and we're not getting that. So we're getting multifamily and mixed use zoning. And I think it's having a negative impact on the projects.
Sure. It's unintended consequences, I think, of the mixed-use zone. If I can just make a comment, the quality of life, absolutely correct. I think there's got to be strike a balance between, whether it's the city looking at it from an economic development perspective or whether it's the community looking at it from a quality of life. I like to think or hope that there is a balance that can be achieved in however we look at this. But I hear loud and clear. It's not one or the other, I guess, or hopefully it's a balancing between somewhere in there.
Yeah, so I'm not happy about giving a project basically a parking bonus because their multifamily project happens to be in a mixed-use zone. I think if you're not providing a certain percentage of commercial element to meet the mixed-use zone, you shouldn't be getting the mixed-use parking
rate. Sure.
rate.
I understand.
And this is just, to me, a huge loophole in that standard.
Yep. Good comment. Thank you.
Commissioner Fleming?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Along that same very line you're talking about there, the multi-use numbers are considerably less than the multifamily. One of the questions I had, is there an additional number that's based on the square footage of the commercial that's in the building? In other words, they get a break for the
residential,
for the living part,
right?
But do we add to that if they've got 4,000 square feet of retail in that? Is there a number that's added to that based on that?
On the mixed-use zone, I'm trying to go off of my memory here. The ratios being less than the multifamily. Right. On the commercial, I don't know. Is there less It is. John's nodding yes. So it looks like there is a difference between that and what is citywide commercial-wise, which then there lies, the question, I guess, are we doing the right correctly as far as the mixed use being much less? Why is that? Because if we're not getting true mixed use, it's kind of defeating the purpose.
In that case, what I'd like to see added to this in some way is a certain percentage of what you're building has to be retail or commercial before you could get that rate. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily have to be 100% multifamily, but if they had a certain percentage of the building, how would that fall in there?
And I think that's a great idea, and we're going to explore that. We've talked about that. The problem with that citywide is that the mixed-use zone spreads all up and down commercial corridors on Santa Fe and throughout some of the other business areas where commercial might work and where commercial might not work.
Right.
So what we are thinking about, and I'd like the input of the commission on this, is we understand the mixed-use zone residential parking requirements are a concern and that we want to look at changing those. So we're going to definitely go down that road. In doing that, do we want to look at you must put commercial in multifamily projects or mixed-use projects? And if we do that, we have to look at where the mixed-use zone is. Because if you have a mixed-use requirement where you have to have ground floor commercial below, residential on the second and third floor, that doesn't work in areas where there's not a lot of activity on the street, really urban areas like you see in the core of the downtown. As you stretch south on Santa Fe or north on Santa Fe, you're going to find areas where you force a developer to do that. They build retail on the ground floor, the residential units get occupied, and then you have vacant commercial space for years and years. And if you want to see examples of that, drive around San Marcos, because that's a requirement that they have, and a lot of their commercial space is empty. So what we propose to do is come back and look at the mixed-use zone standards, look at increasing the residential requirements, and then if you really want to have areas where you have commercial ground floor as a requirement, let's look at where we want to put those so that we think they're in the right
Specific
place.
areas, yeah. I think that's a wonderful idea, and I would support that.
Yeah,
Very large.
Sure, I'm sorry for interrupting.
Oh, go ahead.
The only thing I was going to add is because we're talking the citywide parking requirements, but there's also the mixed-use zone itself. The timing, I'm sure, is a big factor. Thinking, is this all going to happen at the same time? I'm not quite sure. I have not discussed with John in detail as far as how that's going to all happen, if it's going to affect downtown, or is it just the mixed-use zone, and then subsequent to the parking code being updated. But I think we hear loud and clear that we definitely need to go back and do something about it, because the way it is, it doesn't work. Or it's not seem to be working correctly, I guess. So
I have full faith in y'all. I'm sure you'll come up with something great there.
Sure.
The one last thing that I had is, it was mentioned earlier about getting a certain, in the transit district of the downtown, having, or maybe other areas too, but having a lesser requirement for that, especially if, as was said earlier, you can get in with the transit passes of some kind, so that that's, but other than that, I think you've done a heck of a job on this.
Sure, well, thank you.
Thank you for all your work.
Commissioner Rosler?
I have a couple of questions for Mr. Turlock. Your recommendation on commercial, it seems to me that at least as far as traffic generation rates are concerned, there's a difference between local, community, and regional centers. Did you find that in the size of our strip centers versus the community centers with the grocery store versus the Target center? Did you find a difference in the amount of parking demand there?
Per thousand?
Per thousand, yes.
I'd have to think about how we did it, but yes. I mean, typically in our model, we see, when we collect data, we see a difference, and that's how we looked at this here. And I could break down, or have to look at the list, but yes, we're treating something like, say, a Target and a Walmart center differently than a center that has, we looked at several centers, say, with a drugstore like a CVS and Starbucks and that type of thing. So the ratio, like a difference between community shopping center and a regional shopping center. Now, in your case, the requirement's the same.
Okay.
usually, I think a regional shopping center, we do see more demand.
Right, right, okay. Secondly, in the study, did you consider the number of families that are living in existing multifamily developments?
No.
Okay.
Now, I'll just say, that's the first answer to the question, no.
The simple answer is no.
The simple answer is no. First of all, it's very hard to determine that. When we look at anything regarding parking, we look at number of cars. And the model is very interesting, when we model these things, but usually we don't know exactly a reason why it's happening, but we collect enough data that we say, we see this many cars, so this is what's going on. What the reason for that is, we're not sure. Is it sometimes that you have a lot of families, a lot of people living in a apartment where, say, a generation or two ago that would not be happening? Maybe. On the other hand, overall, we see per household, per family, car ownership typically is going down, even in suburban areas, but maybe you also have people doubling up. Why no, we didn't get into that. And part of the problem, I think, as we investigate these things is really, to what extent, I think a question came up about, enforcement and inspection.
Right.
Very often, de facto, parking is used to regulate things like land uses, not the other way around. So in this case, no, there wasn't any way that we could determine that.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then a couple of comments for Patsy. I'm not sure where the city's at right now with parking enforcement. Do we have a parking enforcement officer?
We do.
And
yep.
I think this effort's going to require that to be expanded, and that's going to be a budget issue. And so I think, from my perspective, I would encourage additional enforcement, although that's probably going to raise some concerns. And then I completely agree with what John was saying about the mixed use. I think there are certain areas of town, the downtown South Santa Fe, maybe North Santa Fe, where if we can create a pedestrian environment, the mixed use is a requirement. Down up and down Melrose, where it's mixed use and it's done for flexibility in land uses. Then if they choose to go commercial or residential, then they need to meet our multifamily residential standards. A thought on the Breeze Hill project. I still think that they could make that a mixed-use project with ground floor commercial right in back of the CVS, and then residential behind it. And I think that would be worth modifying the parking. But that was just a thought.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Garrettson, please.
Yes, a couple of questions. Did we study recent multifamily development and find out what the impact of parking been, what on the surrounding areas? For instance, Avalon and other places. Do we know what the impact has been? I mean, we have open meetings and people complain about all that parking, but did we do a study to find out just how bad that impact is on the surrounding neighborhoods?
Part of what Stefan's been looking at, we try to understand first off, in terms of projects that have been built or completed, existing in the ground, what they got as far as parking ratios. We wanted to understand whether there are existing problems in other parts, not just the ones that we keep hearing about, not just Avalon or Breeze Hill. We wanted to go other parts of the city to see if the same thing is happening in other parts of our community. So first things off is we wanted to understand what ratios they got at that point. Were different parking code, different ratios, or maybe there were special provisions for that project. So we had, we did part of that kind of an assessment, so if you will, of certain projects, large multifamily projects. And Stefan looked at, obviously for parking count, he had his staff visit some of these, including the Paseo, during nighttime to see what kind of activities were happening there. So yes, we are, long answer to your question, we're trying to understand. And based on what we've seen, and Stefan, feel free to jump in, as far as the issues that we see, yeah, there is spillover. I mean, nobody's going to negate that fact. But again, is it only because people are just too many cars, or is it because of the fact that they're just not properly using their garages, or a combination of the above? So there's all kinds of things that are, the dynamics of parking is complicated because there's no one way to pinpoint there's only one problem. It's not that. I think it's a combination. And then we talked a lot about parking management. We've had in previous meetings about the fact that it's a management issue on site, and we people are controlling and understanding what their residents are doing or not doing correctly. So a lot of that plays a factor too, because there's several projects that we looked at that seems to be working fine, and there's no complaints around in the area, but in some of the older projects or multifamily projects, but it varies. It's a difficult subject, and nobody's going to say that, yeah, we have the one solution and it's going to fix it all. So.
But shouldn't we have a definition of existing conditions? You know, what has been approved in the past, was that a good decision or a bad decision relative to parking? Are we underutilizing the parking? Is there such a demand that it's having a very negative impact on the surrounding community? I think those are important questions to be asked.
For sure. Those are important questions, and I think also the timing factor, over time, the need for parking or the dependency on the car, whether people had many cars and the cars becoming more and more affordable to purchase a car. So you have multiple cars in one family where before may not have been as common. So I think the economy over time, 20 years past, things change and contribute towards, you know, what we see today or perceive today to be a problem. There's a lot of that, the factors that can change over time. But our goal is to, we're trying to get, obviously, a better understanding of what the problems that we hear these recent months, and trying to see how that can play a factor in how we make the recommendations. But again, yeah, it's a complicated issue anyways.
Do we have any data that would tell us whether having a higher parking space demand in Vista has had any impact on development in Vista? I mean, it seems to me that the demand for building in Vista is about as high as it's been in 10 or 15 years. So the higher demand or the higher requirements for parking does not seem to have impacted the demand to come to Vista to build.
True, good point.
True?
That's a good point, because after the general plan got updated in 2012, we didn't see a downturn. I mean, we're seeing an upswing subsequent to that, because everybody knew where we're going to go in the next 20 years or what have you with the general plan. So yes, I would agree with that. We haven't seen people, oh my gosh, your parking rates are too high, I'm not coming to Vista. You know, that's not what we see. But then again, keep in mind, what we have seen is an influx of residential projects. And that could also be attributed to just overall need for housing, vacancy rates being low. So not necessarily because the parking is great or the parking ratios are low, so we're going to come to Vista. I don't think that's what's triggering, quite honestly, the influx. Because if you look at commercial, we're not getting a lot of commercial. In fact, there's been, on the other side, there's a lot of empty spaces everywhere still. And if it were attributed to parking, we could say that perhaps that's causing people not to come, but I don't think that's true in the whole region per se. But certainly is a factor, as we talked, and Stefan talked about it in his slides about the cost and how much space it takes, and if it's not utilized, it's just sitting there for nothing. It's like the Walmart parking lot, it's just the sea of parking and empty pavement, just nothing. I mean, it's just basically not contributing to anything.
We do not have any big spots for a big box shopping center or a Walmart or a Target, do we? Potential open space to where somebody could build that kind of.
Oh, another regional shopping center? Yeah. Not that we're pretty much built out.
So that's really not an issue.
No, we're pretty much built out.
We're talking about, infills of vacant lots spread out throughout the
Correct.
city.
Correct. And that's what we're trying to do, is saying, how can we better utilize those spaces that are not just being efficient? I guess, again, I understand, and I remember Commissioner Carroll's comments about quality of life, but if we're thinking about economic development where it's not contributing towards those factors, so that's the hope. That's something that we want to do or look at for the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question about underutilization, and I'm not sure if that's a Stefan or, excuse me, Ms. Chow, but so to try to wrap my hands around it, does that mean that on a Wednesday afternoon in June, the Target shopping center should be 80% full? And if it's...
I don't recall the exact percentage, but something like that. And again,
Okay.
that comes down to a design day where, I mean, there are cities where you will build to an average, and if you build to an average in December, people are circling and circling.
Okay.
Sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't want that. That's something of a policy call or a market call. But yes, that's a good example. In June, it might be 70 or 80% because you have built to December, and in December you want to have enough because that's when you generate most of your sales. But in December, if you have more than enough, then that's a real issue, just in a nutshell.
Yeah, okay.
For retail.
All right, thank you so much. Commissioner Carroll, please.
Thank you. I think the commercial, the analysis and recommendations, I think all that's fine. And I think, as I mentioned, that's where the idea of economic competitiveness comes in. But I want to see if I can phrase further my concerns about the multifamily parking, and that's doing a study to come up with an ideal minimum number of parking spaces needed for multifamily, then setting our standard at that ideal minimum, and then building to that. And then in the example of, say, a 100-unit complex, we've built to that ideal minimum number of spaces. It only takes a few extra cars out of 100 apartment units to impact every resident there. Every 100 units will be negatively impacted by just a few extra cars if you've built to that minimum ideal number. And so I don't like this notion of coming up with, we can get by with this as a minimum, because in the real world, that's not what happens. And we have to bump that up and have a safety factor for multi-use based on all the things that get thrown at us and all these, shared family homes, I just, that concerns me, of just saying, okay, we've figured out this is our minimum, let's go with this minimum. And I know we're not proposing, the state's not proposing to reduce those, but just to approach it from that angle, I just don't like doing it that way.
So let me just make sure I understand it. I'm on the same page. So if let's take an example. On the residential apartments on that slide, the chart, we're just breaking it down by the studio, 1 bedroom, 2 and 3, and it gives you the starting at 2.33. That's currently what's in our code, which again is different than mixed use, different downtown specific plan. Commissioner Carroll, just to clarify, are you suggesting that the way to go is perhaps to revisit those numbers to allow for more or require more parking spaces that we currently require right now? Or...
Probably if the mixed use thing was fixed, in my opinion, it would probably just fix everything as the numbers are. I think the shortage, my perceived shortage in parking is stemming from the higher allowances. The lesser allowance
in the mixed use.
In the mixed use.
Okay, yeah, because the projects that we have had recently are mostly in the mixed use zone, and I think that's what's causing a lot of the the outcomes, because the ones that we have seen are not in the multifamily zone, which would require these ratios instead. So I think, yeah, for sure, we need to go back to the mixed-use zone.
Yeah, I'm just used to, we design with safety factors.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you have this perfect world, ideal number of minimum spaces, you have no safety factor. And so, boom, there's an impact to everybody that lives there.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Looney, please.
Thank you. A different kind of question with a different perspective. The comment was made that the availability of parking can determine the number of vehicles that a resident may have. And in looking at the area of the courthouse, where we've got a number of apartment buildings and living units there, can engineering, and if it is engineering department's responsibility, is it possible to begin to remove some of the street parking from those current streets, where some of those are painted red curbs, or maybe there is a 2-hour parking limit? It comes back to what was said about parking enforcement. But for months now, we've been hearing, don't build Breeze Hill because of the parking. We've got the parking issues with Avalon. Is it possible for the city engineering department to begin to phase in red curbs on some of those streets to where we don't eliminate all parking, but maybe we can stagger some of that parking where we develop an open space, open street space, so to speak, on some of those streets? Maybe the limited number of street parking spaces would thereby reduce the potential ownership of additional vehicles within the existing units, because we can't manage those existing properties. But does the city have the authority to control what happens on the streets within the city right away?
Yes. Yeah, good comment.
Just a thought.
Good comment. That's what one of the comments in the last meeting was, I'm just saying what we heard at the last meeting, pay for on-street parking downtown. I don't know. I mean, just things that people were saying, or limit the amount of parking on some of these residential streets, because it's right now you're just able to go there and park on it. But good comment. So with stuff that we have to, and obviously I'm making notes of these, but stuff that we have to look at.
Commissioner Rossler,
possibilities are. Sorry.
One thought that I missed prior, I think Mr. Turlock was right in his discussion about proximity. If the on-street parking is closer to your unit than your garage or carport, you're going to park on street. We're doing the studies in the Otay Ranch on how far people would walk to a transit station. We found that people are lazy, and they'll walk the shortest distance that they can. I kind of agree with Commissioner Looney. My concern about limiting on-street parking is that there's already a demand, and where those cars are going to go, and are we going to push them off, spill over into residential streets and neighborhoods, and we'd have to be, I think, very careful about that. However, red curving for sight distance coming out of driveways would be a balanced solution, I think. So, just a thought.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Jackal, please.
Thank you. I'd like to just kind of mull over the enforcement part of this a little bit more. If we're talking about the city doing enforcement, then we're talking about somebody driving around and looking to see who's parking where, and if there are time limitations placed on, say, for example, on-street parking, are they overdue, and that sort of thing. So there's that part of it. But then there's parking management by the owners of the residential or commercial properties. And I'm wondering I'm just wondering is it possible to make sure that employers, say downtown, absolutely require that their staff or employees park in some other place than right across the street in some other business person's parking spaces? I mean, is there some way to get a handle on that? I don't know. We have multiple residential places where they have been told they are to park in their garages and not use the garages for storage, all right? Is there some way that we can mandate that the management of these places go inspect the garages? Or is there a sticker that people have to put on their cars if they live there, and if their car with that sticker is found in the wrong place, then there's a consequence? I don't know what's possible, but it aggravates me when the management that's possible isn't happening, and I don't know what's possible.
Yeah, if I can just make some comments on that. At the last meeting, a lot was said about that and parking management on site, and whether it's addressed in the CCNRs or the manager on site is aware of all these issues happening. How do you control bad behavior for purposes of using garage for other than parking, or for other examples that you brought up, Commissioner Jackal? So there are tools that are available. It's just, does the city get involved in that or not? And I think that's the bigger question policy-wise, in terms of what can we as a city do that's within our control and reasonableness, and how do we convey that to the public. But again, we don't want to start becoming part of something that's a private matter, because it just gets into a situation that we're trying to get in there too deep, beyond what our task is at hand. So anyways, but there's a lot of that was said in the last meeting about that. So
staying with Commissioner Jackal's comment, which I think is an excellent one about garages being used for more than just cars.
Mm-hmm.
My mom lives in a very nice suburb in San Gabriel Valley, and the city of West Covina, along with their trash company, which I don't know who it is, twice a year they have a pickup day, and residents can put anything and everything curbside. And off goes that couch and those 3 mattresses that have been taking up, and it really appears to help. And I'm sure that fee is probably built into the trash, but maybe EDCO could play a part in helping to free up our streets by unloading the stuff in the garages. Commissioner Fleming.
Thank you. Just real quickly, along the same line that we're talking about the streets being red marked and stuff like that, it comes back to the thought that you had mentioned earlier that really caught my ear, where it said about pushing the cars off the streets versus or pulling them in into their parking lots. And this is an opportunity to phase in something along those lines, where we could do, as was said here, just start with the widening of the entrances with red lines, and then eventually come with something else that would extend it, but not do it all at once, because you would really drive everybody crazy if you did that. But I think it would be something that would have to be phased in. But I think it's a wonderful idea.
Commissioner Carroll, please.
Do you guys remember how that went with North Melrose and the bike lanes?
Yes. We all remember.
Okay. All right, just wondering.
We all remember that event. Let's see, I don't know if there are other commissioners' comments, but I wanted to give the opportunity to the members in the audience as well.
Before we do that,
Sure.
I would like to, the Student Commissioner Rudebush, Student Commissioner Acevedo, any comments, any enlightenments from?
You good?
No? Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to open up the floor because I didn't want to neglect the audience. I'm sorry I have my back towards you, only because of the microphone. But if you had any comments, please come up to the microphone. Don't be shy. If you have any questions, concerns that you wanted to raise, this is the time. So, Gentleman coming up.
Good evening. I just have a couple of comments. Number one, developers are smart. If they're going to pay $60 a square foot for parking, they're not going to do it. That's going to be offset by, the rental space that they could charge. The other thing is when you put a mixed-use designation on a multifamily location, it just skews the whole parking formula completely. Avalon is in a mixed-use location. I guess that's because the restaurants around it, the OGs and the things like that, allow it to have that designation. The Breeze Hill complex, which is one that I'm very concerned about, is also in a mixed-use area. Because right now it's commercial, which they want to tear down and they want to put apartments there. But it's going to be a multi-family location. How they can use the mixed-use ratio for parking in that area just boggles my mind. I just don't understand it. And the property that is probably going to be coming before you soon, the 2100 San Marcos Boulevard, that's currently designated light industrial. They want that to be changed to mixed use so that they can build, I think it's almost 200 condos, which is a good idea to build condos. I appreciate that. But they want to build a 100-room hotel as well and consider that mixed use. If they do that, rather than have it be designated residential, that's going to reduce the parking requirements by almost 150 spaces. And I don't know if any of you have seen that proposal, but to get into that location and to get out of that location, there's one driveway currently. And the center median prevents anybody from turning left into it. They would have to go all the way around, make a U-turn somewhere to make a right turn into it. And the only access would be westbound on San Marcos Boulevard going into, I guess it's Palomar Airport Road. Anyway, those are some things I really think you folks need to consider, and that is a designation of multifamily in a mixed-use area. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Garrettson, please.
I have a question about safety. And one of my concerns are apartments that build parking on both sides, and you have to go in this one driveway, and then you park underneath, and you're backing out. At the same time, you have it on the other side. Mm-hmm. And then you have a trash container at the end with handicap parking. Mm-hmm. And there are no sidewalks. To me, that's a major safety issue, and I don't know how we address it, but I think that's an important thing we have to address. How do the circulation of people around the apartment from parking, especially where they can't get from the parking garage to the apartment. They have to come out and where all the traffic is.
Basically,
and we saw that recently.
Sure. They have to walk through the drive aisle. And to get to the front door or behind the cars, etc., much like in a commercial center. Yeah, the provision of sidewalks is not always the case everywhere throughout a project, just because it's not always in the developer's eye, I guess. The way they lay out the projects, it doesn't always happen. But I know that issue has come up in the past about access to the units themselves. So it's a design issue, definitely when we're reviewing projects and where the access and the paths and how they connect. So we have to look at that more closely when we review projects to make sure that there is, in fact, direct connections and people are not traversing through areas that they probably is not safe, which is the point that you're raising. So
exactly. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other comments?
Boy, less comments in the first meeting. We had a really back and forth on the first meeting, so this is a little different. Okay.
Okay, I think that concludes this item.
All right. Thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate everybody coming tonight and sharing comments and concerns. If I may just tell you what's going to happen next. We have a council workshop that is scheduled for February the 2nd, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So everyone is invited. Again, what we hope to do is similar to the style as far as the presentation and the content is to share with the mayor and the council the information about parking. Stefan will be there, obviously. And at that point, we hope to perhaps, based on what we heard here tonight, fine-tune some of our preliminary recommendations that we had in mind, aside from the ones that you saw on the slide, but kind of come back with maybe more fine-tuned in our minds anyways, but still preliminary because, again, we haven't set anything in stone. It's still a work in progress. And we realize because it is such a difficult topic, there's no one quick solution to all of the things that are being said or have been said. But our goal is at the third meeting with the council, we'll have one more attempt at it. And then subsequent to that, we'll be able to kind of put down more firm kind of in our minds, and again, draft form in the staff's minds and the consultants about some recommendations based on what we're hearing. And then hopefully to move forward. February the 2nd at 2 o'clock here, council chambers. 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Commissioner Carroll?
Ms. Chow, so what's the process of after that? When the code ultimately gets updated, will that come before the planning commission or just directly to council?
No, you would definitely be seeing this as a formal public hearing format. So we're building up to it, so when we come back formally before the planning commission, we'll be getting your recommendation, changes, what have you, and then at that point, only after that, we'll be going before city council.
We'd make our recommendation and then send.
Oh, sure, for sure. Yep, that would be the step. Thank you.
Okay, next would be commission staff discussion, council action, and reports. Nothing? All right. Comments from the community development director, city planners, and the city attorney? Nope.
We actually just wanted to remind you, we might have a meeting on the 16th of February. It might be to consider an early design review item, so that's might be one thing that might come up.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I guess we are adjourned. Thank you.